The diner had been open since 6 that morning, and Nora Calloway had been sitting in the corner booth since 6:15, which the waitress knew because she had been the one to unlock the front door and find her already waiting on the steps in the November cold. A small woman in a gray wool coat with a patent leather purse on her lap, and the expression of someone who had arranged her face into Patience so long ago that Patience had become the face. She had ordered 1 cup of coffee. She had not ordered a second. She had been sitting in that booth for 4 hours and 40 minutes when the bell above the door rang and the waitress looked up, and the woman in the corner booth did not look up at all, which told the waitress something she couldn't entirely name. The bell rang again 3 minutes later. The waitress did look up that time. A man walked in with a German shepherd at his knee, and the dog swept the diner in one slow, systematic arc. Booths. Counter. Kitchen passed through, the corner booth, and then went very still. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What you're about to hear will restore something in you that the world has been slowly wearing down. We read every single comment. Stay with us. Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Reed, retired, was 38 years old and had been in Millhaven, Wyoming for 6 days, which was 4 days longer than he had planned when he drove north from Colorado Springs on what he had told himself was a supply run, and what had actually been a need to be somewhere unfamiliar for a while. He was tall and rangy through the shoulders in the way of men who stay lean not by trying, but by being built in a particular direction, with dark hair cut close, and a jaw that carried 3 days of growth, and a nose that had been broken once. A training accident in Pendleton in 2015, not combat. Though he had stopped mentioning that distinction because it didn't seem to matter to anyone but him. His eyes were a pale, clear hazel that read as green in certain light and gray in others, and that people consistently described, when they tried to describe them, as watchful, not suspicious. Watchful, the kind of eyes that notice things the way a compass notices north, not as a choice, but as a function. He had served 12 years with the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, completing 4 deployments: Helmand Province in 2010 and 2012, the Korengal Valley in 2014, and a 6-month rotation in Ramadi in 2016 that had ended when an Eid took out the vehicle ahead of his, and the blast wave had done something to the hearing in his right ear that the VA described as significant partial loss, and that he described as the world sounding like it was being narrated from the next room. He had a silver star and a purple heart and a medical discharge stamped November 2017 and a single wide on 12 acres outside Colorado Springs, where he ran contract security consulting and kept mostly to himself. He was not a man who needed noise. The partial deafness had taken care of most of it anyway. What he had not found a solution for was the particular quality of silence that a house reaches at 2 in the morning when the only sound is a dog breathing in the corner, which is either a peaceful thing or an unbearable thing, depending on factors he had not yet fully identified. He drove when the silence got loud. Millhaven had been the place the road took him. Ghost was a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat so pale it had earned him his name, not white, but the color of ash in the morning before the wind moves it, with darker saddle markings along his back that deepened to charcoal at the spine and ears. He weighed 81 pounds, all of it deliberate. His right rear leg bore a shallow lateral scar from a wire-triggered device in the Korengal in 2014 that had caught the dog and his handler in a doorway and killed neither of them by a margin that Ethan had spent 2 years trying not to think about, and had eventually simply accepted as the kind of fact that exists outside the range of explanation. The scar pulled slightly in cold weather, giving Ghost a faint favoring of the right side that was not a limp so much as a memory the body kept against its will. He moved with the focused, contained authority of a dog who had learned that the world did not become safe on its own and had decided, somewhere in his training and experience, to help it along. His ears never stopped working. In all the time since Ethan had navigated the military working dog adoption process, 11 months, more paperwork than 2 combat deployments combined, 2 congressional inquiries, Ghost had never reacted to noise, only to meaning. Ghost had reacted to something the moment they stepped through the door of the Millhaven Grill. The diner occupied the ground floor of a 2-story brick building on Main Street that had been a hardware store before that and a feed supplier before that, and carried in its walls the particular density of buildings that had been needed for a long time. The front windows were fogged at the edges from the cold outside and the warmth of the griddle inside. The smell was coffee and bacon grease and the faint iron undertone of old radiator heat. The kind of smell that belongs to places that open early and close late and do not change their menu. There were 6 other customers at 9:50 in the morning. 2 men at the counter with work jackets and coffee. A young woman with a laptop near the window. A family of 3 in the center booth finishing breakfast. And in the far corner, in a booth with red vinyl seating and a window that looked out on the alley beside the building, a small woman in a gray coat who had not looked up when the bell rang. Ghost walked toward her. Ethan let the leash run out to its full length because Ghost's body language was not threat posture. It was the loose, deliberate movement he used when he was going somewhere he had decided to go, which was different from being taken somewhere, and Ethan had learned to read the difference. The dog reached the corner booth and sat beside it, not facing outward, facing the woman. She looked at Ghost. She had a face that had been pretty once and was now something better, precise and deeply set, with dark eyes that held the particular brightness of someone who cried rarely and thought constantly. She was 73 or 74. Her white hair was penned back neatly, and her coat was clean and pressed. And her purse was held in her lap with both hands the way people hold things when holding something is what they have to do. On her left hand, a thin gold band. On the table in front of her, a cup of coffee, long cold. A folded road map. A small piece of paper with an address written on it in someone else's handwriting. "He's very calm," she said to Ethan, who had arrived beside Ghost by then. "He likes people," Ethan said, which was a simplification, but not a lie. She looked at the dog for another moment. Then she looked at Ethan the way people look at strangers when they have been waiting a long time and have run out of other options. "Do you know Ridgeline Road?" she asked. He didn't. He'd been in Millhaven 6 days and knew the diner and the hardware store and the county road that ran north. "My daughter lives there," she said. "My son-in-law drove me here this morning to meet her. She was supposed to come at 7. She looked at the piece of paper on the table. She hasn't come." Ethan looked at the map, then at the address, then at the woman who was holding her purse with both hands and had been in this booth since 6:15 and had not ordered a second cup of coffee because she was the kind of woman who did not want to be a bother. "Have you called her?" he asked. "My phone is at home," she said. "My son-in-law took it to charge it last week and I haven't gotten it back." She said this without emphasis, as a fact. "What's your name?" he said. "Nora," she said. "Nora Calloway." He sat down across from her, and Ghost settled at her feet as though the arrangement had been decided well in advance, and the waitress came over with a fresh pot and refilled the coffee without asking, and said, quietly, to Ethan, "She's been here since we opened. I've been watching her. I didn't know what to do. Her daughter's name was Patricia. She lived on Ridgeline Road, a county road 12 miles north, with her husband of 6 years and a horse property she managed on her own while her husband, Nora said this without complaint, as a simple description of fact, ran a construction business out of Casper and was home 4 days a month. The son-in-law who had driven Nora that morning was not Patricia's husband. He was Nora's son-in-law from her first daughter, Linda, who lived in Casper. His name was Derek Stovall. Ethan had spent 12 years in the Marine Corps, learning the difference between information and intelligence. Information was facts. Intelligence was what the facts meant. What the facts meant here arrived quietly, the way things arrive when they have been true for a long time and are finally being said in the right sequence. Nora lived with Linda and Derek in Casper. She had moved in 3 years ago after a fall that had left her with a repaired hip and a reduced confidence in the business of living alone, which she described without self-pity and without bitterness as simply a thing that happened. She had her own room. Derek was a civil engineer with a subcontracting business who drove a new truck and served on the Natrona County Planning Committee, and whose name was on 4 different commercial property holdings in the Casper metro area. Linda was a dental hygienist who worked 30 hours a week and believed, as far as Nora could tell, everything Derek told her. What Derek told her was that Nora was difficult, that she misplaced things, forgot things, became confused about things, that it was a burden, that Linda would eventually have to consider other options. He had been saying this for 2 years, in Nora's presence and outside of it, which she knew because Linda's youngest, a girl of 14 named Caitlin, had told Nora word for word what she had overheard from the hallway, because Caitlin was the kind of child who believed that her grandmother should know what was being said about her. Nora had hugged her and thanked her and told her not to repeat it. She had been deciding what to do with the information ever since. Derek had suggested the trip to Millhaven as a surprise for Patricia. He had found Patricia's number for Nora, written it on the piece of paper, told her Patricia was expecting her, and driven her the 2 hours from Casper that morning. He had not given Nora her phone before they left. He had said he would pick her up at noon. It was now almost 10. He would not be answering his phone. Ethan knew this before he finished the coffee. He knew the shape of it. He had not seen it exactly before, but he recognized the architecture, the isolation, the dependency, the slow narrowing of a person's world until the world was the size of one person's permission. He had seen it in different rooms, under different names. He sat with his hands around his mug and let Nora finish talking, which she did in the measured, careful way of someone who has been arranging words for a long time but rarely had anywhere to put them. And when she finished, he asked one question. "Does Patricia know you were coming?" Nora looked at the piece of paper. "Derek said he called her," she said. And then, very quietly, "But he doesn't like Patricia." Ghost put his chin on the edge of the booth seat beside Nora's knee and stayed there. The waitress was watching from behind the counter. Her name was Greta Lundmark, 61 years old, silver braid, hands that had worked this counter for 22 years, hands that had poured coffee for the whole complicated life of this town, and that now held the pot still above the burner because she was listening. She caught Ethan's eye. She gave him a look that required no translation. She had been watching this situation for nearly 5 hours, and had been waiting for someone to walk in who would know what to do with it. She had not expected a man with a German shepherd. But here was the thing about Millhaven. The right person almost always came in eventually. Ethan borrowed Greta's phone. Patricia Calloway answered on the second ring, and her voice, when Ethan explained who he was and why he was calling, shifted from polite confusion to a silence that had real weight in it. And then she said, He told me Mom didn't want to come. He told me she was tired and he was going to take her home. Her voice was very careful. Is she all right? She's in the diner, Ethan said. She's been here since 6:15. Another silence. I'll be there in 25 minutes, Patricia said. He went back to the booth. He told Nora her daughter was coming. Nora set both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. And something in her posture changed, not dramatically, the way posture changes in films, but in the small, structural way of someone setting down something heavy they had convinced themselves wasn't heavy. Ghost moved from the floor to the seat beside her, which he was not supposed to do in restaurants, and pressed himself gently against her side. And Ethan chose not to address that. Derek Stovall arrived at 11:14. He came in with his hands in the pockets of a good wool coat and the expression of a man running a situation he expected to control. And he stopped when he saw Ethan sitting across from Nora with the dog on the seat beside her. He stood at the end of the booth and he looked at Nora with the particular patience of a man accustomed to redirecting, and he said, "Nora, I've been worried. Patricia couldn't make it. I've been driving around looking for you." "Patricia is on her way," Ethan said. Derek looked at him. A recalibration. "I'm sorry," he said. "Who are you?" Ethan introduced himself by name and rank and told Derek, without raising his voice or shifting his posture, that Patricia had confirmed she had not been called, had not known her mother was coming, and had in fact been told that morning that her mother was too tired to visit. He told him this the way he had briefed command, factually, completely, with a stillness that communicated he was not in a hurry and was not concerned about the response. Ghost had come off the seat. He stood now at the end of the booth table, between Derek and Nora, with the measured, undemonstrative alertness of a dog who has identified where he is needed and has placed himself accordingly. Derek's eyes went to Ghost. Ghost did not look away. "This is a family matter," Derek said. "Nora's family is coming," Ethan said. "You can wait." Behind the counter, Greta had picked up the phone. She was not calling anyone yet, but she had picked it up, and the two men at the counter had turned around on their stools, and the young woman by the window had closed her laptop, and the diner had gone to a particular quality of quiet that everyone in it understood without discussing. "You have no idea what you're involved in," Derek said. His voice had dropped the management tone and picked up something underneath it, which was closer to the real thing. "Nora has cognitive issues. She gets confused. Ask anyone in the family." "I've been talking with Nora for an hour," Ethan said. "She remembers everything about this morning in detail. She knew your name, the address on that paper, the time she was told you'd pick her up, and the fact that you haven't given her phone back in a week." He paused. "She's not confused." Derek looked at Nora, who was sitting very still with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on a middle point that was not Derek and not Ethan, and that had more dignity in it than anything else in the room. "Nora," he said. "Tell him." "Patricia is coming," Nora said. Patricia arrived at 11:41. She was 46 years old and had her mother's dark eyes and a directness in her face that came from years of operating a horse property alone, and when she walked through the door she went directly to the corner booth and put both arms around her mother and held on. And Nora put one hand against Patricia's back with the careful, practiced tenderness of a woman who has been a mother for 46 years and has not stopped. Patricia looked at Derek over her mother's shoulder with an expression that needed no translation. She had called her husband in Casper from the road. He had called his attorney. Ethan gave Patricia everything: the timeline, the address on the paper, the missing phone, the pattern Nora had described over the course of the hour, and Patricia listened with the focused attention of someone assembling something she had been given pieces of for a long time without the center section. She also called Linda. That conversation lasted 9 minutes, and Ethan did not hear most of it. But he heard enough to know that Linda had been told things for 2 years that were being heard differently now. Greta poured coffee for everyone and stood at the end of the counter and did not pretend she wasn't listening. Derek Stovall left the Millhaven Grill at 12:03 without a word, which was a kind of answer. He drove back to Casper and found, when he arrived, that the family attorney Linda had used for their estate planning had already received a call from Patricia's husband's firm, and that the particular legal and financial arrangements Derek had been constructing around Nora for the past 3 years had acquired, overnight, an audience they had not had before. An Adult Protective Services review was opened in Natrona County the following week. A forensic accounting of the joint account Derek had established in Nora's name, in which Nora's Social Security benefits and a modest inheritance had been accumulating for 2 years under Derek's sole signature authority, documented $31,200 in transfers to a holding account that bore only Derek's name. He was charged in March. He did not contest the civil judgment. Linda filed for divorce in April. 8 months after the morning in the corner booth, Nora Calloway sat on the porch of Patricia's horse property on Ridgeline Road in the high Wyoming July, watching Ghost run the fence line of the paddock with the clean ground-eating ease of a dog given space and using every inch of it. Patricia had put a rocker on the porch in June, a solid wood one, not decorative, and Nora had taken to sitting in it in the mornings with coffee and watching the horses in the field and the mountains above the field and the wide particular sky of northern Wyoming that is not like sky anywhere else. She had her phone. She called Caitlin on Sundays. Caitlin had told her grandmother, in their first call after everything, that she had always known something was wrong and had never known if saying so was allowed. Nora had told her, "It is always allowed. It is the most important thing." Ethan had driven back to Colorado Springs in November, the morning after the diner, and had not planned to return. He had returned in February because the road went north again, and Millhaven was where it went. He had come back in May for the same reason, and in July because Patricia had called and asked if he wanted to bring Ghost up for the summer weekend they were doing for Nora's birthday, which he had not expected to be invited to, and which he had said yes to before he finished the sentence. He sat on the porch steps in the July heat with a cup of Nora's coffee — she had taken over the coffee — and watched Ghost abandon the fence line and cut across the field toward the paddock, ears back from the speed, and at the far corner of the fence Nora laughed, which was a sound that had been a long time coming, and that the porch and the field and the Wyoming sky received without any particular fuss, the way good places receive the things they were built for. His hearing in the right ear had not improved. The 2 in the morning silence was still the same silence. But the road had taken him somewhere twice now that he hadn't expected to find, and he was beginning to understand that the road always knew more than the destination did, if you drove it long enough and paid attention to what the dog did when you got there. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a bell above a diner door, and a dog who walks directly to a corner booth without being told, and a woman who has been sitting there since 6:15 with a cold cup of coffee and a piece of paper with an address she was never meant to reach. God does not always send rescue in forms that announce themselves. He sends it through people who happen to drive north when the silence gets too loud, and through animals who have learned to walk toward what needs them, without waiting to be asked. Nora Calloway sat in that booth for 4 hours and 45 minutes and held her patience and her purse and her dignity, and she did not stop believing that someone would come. Someone came. They almost always do, for people who don't stop believing. Hold on. Pay attention. And never, ever underestimate what a dog already knows. If Nora's story touched your heart today, share it with someone who needs to hear that help still comes, sometimes through the most unexpected doors. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us this: have you ever stayed in a difficult place longer than you should have? Or held on when you weren't sure anyone was coming? Your story might be the one that gives someone else the courage to wait one more hour. If you believe in stories of loyalty, courage, and the quiet ways grace finds people who need it, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always that no corner booth is too far, no road too long, for the people who are supposed to find you. You are never alone.